Welcome to the Supreme Court Podcast. All opinions expressed in this podcast do not reflect the views of the Supreme Court. For clarity, the text of the decision prevails.
In May 2025, the Judicial and Bar Council, or the JBC, held the public interviews for the position of Supreme Court Associate Justice at the Supreme Court Session Hall in view of the compulsory retirement of Honorable Mario V. Lopez on June 4 this year. The JBC is a body created by the 1987 Philippine Constitution tasked with selecting, screening, and nominating qualified individuals for appointment to the judiciary. It is composed of the Chief Justice as ex officio chairperson, the Secretary of Justice, and a representative of the Congress as ex officio members, as well as a representative of the Integrated Bar, a professor of law, a retired member of the Supreme Court, and a representative of the private sector. In line with its constitutional mandate to recommend appointees to the judiciary through a transparent and merit-based selection process, the JBC allows members of the public to observe its proceedings during candidate interviews. How does the JBC conduct the screening and nomination of candidates for the judiciary? And how does it ensure that the process is transparent and merit-based? Hi, I'm Attorney Mike Navalio, Supreme Court Chief Communications Officer. It's the 23rd of May 2025, and today we will learn about the Judicial and Bar Council, its role and functions, with a particular focus on how it conducts its constitutional mandate of screening and selecting nominees for the positions of justices, judges, the ombudsman, and his or her deputies, and the members of the Legal Education Board. And joining us to talk about this is Attorney Nisauro H. Firme, Judicial and Bar Council regular member representing the Academe. Hi, Attorney Firme. I know you just came from a grueling week of interviewing applicants to the judiciary. Thank you so much for joining us, and welcome to the Supreme Court Podcast.
Thank you, Attorney Mike. It's a privilege to be here, and of course, to shed light on some things that needs to be enlightened.
Right, and we know that in the past few days, 16 applicants for the Associate Justice position in the Supreme Court interviewed with the JBC, and you were one of the interviewers.
Yes.
So we're turning the tables around, and we are now interviewing you.
That's the most unfortunate thing. I'm not applying, in fact,
for any position. But, I think it really helps for the public to understand what the JBC is. Yeah. So what is this body called the Judicial and Bar Council? Why is there a need for a JBC?
Yeah. Well, the good thing about the JBC, if let's try to look at how it was created. So at present, we may just look at the Constitution. The Constitution provides that there is a need for a body that will search, screen, and select. We call that SSS. Judicial applicants for purposes of nominating them to the President. So that the President will appoint them. But looking deeper into how the JBC was created, as we all know, prior to this 1987 Constitution, we have the Constitution during the Marcos era. And as we all know, the 1987 Constitution somehow restricted or restrained the power of the President.
Yes.
So, in order to depoliticize judicial appointments, so there must be a body created in order to let's say, put judicial candidates or judicial personnel out of the realm of the presidents. So that's why there is a separate body that is in charge for that. So that basically that is the reason why JBC was created, to depoliticize all judicial appointments.
So in short, the president cannot just appoint anyone that he wants for these positions, but it has to go through a vetting system.
Yes.
So only those who go through the vetting system can be recommended to the president.
Yes, yeah, that's true. That's how important, or probably we can say different, this JBC was created. Technically, if you look at it, it's the HR of the judiciary. We are at the forefront. So nobody can enter the judiciary, judges to be particular, without going through us. So we are technically at the forefront, if you can call it as such, or a gatekeeper, so to speak.
And Does it also serve a secondary purpose of ensuring that only those qualified can actually be appointed?
Yes, that's true, Attorney Mike. No, if you try to look at the Constitution itself, no, it provides for the qualifications, and that is competence, integrity, probity, and independence. So we are guided by those attributes. No, so in other words, in vetting these candidates, we have to look into their competence, integrity, probity, and independence.
And who are the members of the JBC?
Yeah. So at present, we have Chief Justice Alex Esmundo sitting as the chairperson of the ex officio chairperson of the JBC. We have Secretary Jesus Crispin Remulla, no, being the Secretary of the Department of Justice, sitting as ex officio member. So another member would be the ex officio member of the Congress, which would either be the representative from the Senate or the House of Representatives. And of course, the 4 regular members. No? The 4 regular members would be the one representing the retired justices of the Supreme Court, which is presently being held by Justice Jose Cacral Mendoza. The one, of course, I represent the academe, no, the law profession. No. We have the representative from the IBP, which is now being occupied by retired Justice Erlinda Piñera Uy. And the last one would be Attorney Jojo Mejia, representing the private sector.
Why is it necessary that you have these representations? Private sector, academe, the IBP, and you have a 4th one representing retired justices.
Yeah.
Do they have specific roles to play?
Yeah. Interestingly, no, the Constitution does not provide for the reason why there are the 4 regular members. But they are sectoral, no, representatives, and we have different roles. If you come to look at it, let us look at the representative from the retired justice of the Supreme Court. Obviously, we are vetting applicants, no, for Supreme Court associate justice. So it's only up and proper that their concerns will be represented. On my part, since I represent the academe, no, since of course we have law professors, we have law schools, so it's better that their voice will be coursed through me, no, or any representative of the academe. No. Insofar as the private sector, of course, private sectors technically they are the stakeholders of the judiciary. So any decision of the Supreme Court would technically, no, affect them eventually, no, somehow or another, no, directly or indirectly. So it is only proper that I would have a voice, no, in the JBC on who to select. Same thing with the IBP. No? Since this is a recognized legal organization, it is only proper also that they have the representation insofar as vetting and selecting future judges and justices.
For the representatives for the private sector and the academe, is it required that they should also be lawyers?
Yeah. No? Interestingly, no, I was even asking myself, am I considered in the practice of law? No? Well, since I'm into policy making right now, no, we make policies on who should be included in the judiciary. So the question is, am I in the practice of law? Oh, yeah, but I think no, we should be members of the legal profession, even from the academe as well as in the private sector, simply because how can we formulate policies pertaining to law if we are not members of it? So at least we have some working knowledge on how law works. And in fact, even in our position papers on some matters that would be required by the Supreme Court, no, it would require, of course, legal disquisition. And it is only proper that the members of the JBC would all be lawyers. Otherwise, it may happen that we may be lacking on some legal points if we will be occupied by non-lawyer members.
Right. Is there a fixed term for each of the members? I mean, do you start this term together, or is it maybe staggered basis?
Yeah. It is on a staggered basis. No, we have take turns. So every year, every member would come. No? So we have only 4 years. So, but it can be renewed. No? So basically, for this year, someone would retire and he can be replaced unless the member has been reappointed. So the following year, same scenario. No? There could be a new member unless there will be a reappointment to the sitting member, and so on and so forth.
Attorney, for me, let's talk about how the vacancies in the judiciary are filled. I know the JBC announces that there's a vacancy for this position, but walk us through the process of the application and then the nomination procedure. What happens?
So it's very interesting because I'm also lecturing this in UP. We call this JBC hour. No? For the information of everyone, no? It is not the JBC which determines what vacancy will be occupied no? or will be posted for application. It will always start with a letter from the court ad. So, obviously because the court ad knows who would retire, which station has been vacated either because of resignation, early retirement. No? So he has all the list. And with his recommendation, it will now prompt us no, to evaluate should we include this in the opening, because there are some areas, of course, we deliver it this en banc. There are some areas that we do not, as early as now, include in the filling up of vacancy. Why? Because these are unorganized stations.
Right.
And it will be impractical to open it for application since there is no physical court to speak of. So, from that recommendation, we will, from the court, we will still have to look whether that is viable or feasible. And from that, we will now make an announcement. No? So there will now be a publication. We call that a call for application.
And this is with respect to the lower courts.
Yes.
For the court. But what about for, say, Justices of Sandigan Bayan, Court of Appeals, and the Supreme Court? Who would direct you to make the announcement?
Well, actually, it will start with us because we already have knowledge on who would retire.
Okay.
No? So we will make the publication no, at our own instance. There's no need for the court ad to make a recommendation or a recommendation letter.
And then so they submit. And then how do you sort out all the applications?
Well, it's a very tedious process. No? Well, interestingly, we have now the ORAS, no, the online registration application system. No? So the good thing about ORAS is that once you apply no, for any judicial vacancy, you will be given a certain number, which you will possess all throughout your life. So in the event you want to apply, for instance, you apply now for a lower court, and after 10 years you wish to apply to become an Associate Justice of the Court of Appeals, your profiles are already uploaded there. There are some documents that would not be, or irreplaceable. For instance, birth certificate, transcript of record. So they are already uploaded there. There is no need to resubmit them.
Right.
So with these applications in the ORAS, we will now look who among these have complied with the documentary requirements. No? So for those who have failed to submit the required forms, all of them, we will send them a letter telling them that regrets, you were not able to submit all the required documents, and therefore you will not be excluded.
You don't give them a chance to submit additional requirements?
It would really actually depend. No? For instance, like in our case, there are instances that would require an inter-office clearances, like OBC. Clearance from the OBC, or like the ombudsman. We have to understand that these applicants should not be a victim of our the red tape processes, the bureaucratic process of long delays. So once these documents, for instance, OBC clearance has not been secured, we have to consider na, okay, we can extend it. No? In the meantime, you just have to submit the receipt, no, the OR, that proof that you have asked or secured a copy of that. Only that the issuance of the OBC clearance has been delayed. Same thing with the ombudsman clearance. So at times we would allow that extension. No? But other than that, no, for instance, no, transcript of records, there is no, I think, no, if you really intend to apply to the judiciary, at the very onset, you should secure these documents with you. No? So to continue, so we have to segregate those persons or applicants who have complied with all the documents from those who have not. So those who have not, we will send them a notice through email that they failed. Sometimes they would ask for a reconsideration, but of course it will be discretionary on our end if we will grant them. No? For those who have completed submission of documents, no, their names will now be published. So if you would see another publication coming from the JBC would be the names of applicants. So I am so enthused by this publication. Why? Because it now opens them to feedbacks from the public.
So you read comments on social media?
Yes. Because we value. No, I personally value public participation. So I value their insights. No, so that's why we have to publish them. If there is anything bad, tell us. If there's something good about them, tell us. Because you know, when you work in the GBC, you would only be dealing with papers, their documents they submitted. But you want to know who these persons are as they walk in their community, as they work in their offices. So there is also a need to know them, no, on how they behave, no, on how they act on these areas.
And so, how crucial are these feedback? Like, how often do you get this feedback coming from the public? Maybe comments on social media, maybe a letter sent to your office. And how crucial are these so that they can qualify? Yeah,
actually, we would receive different kinds of feedbacks. No, that would be a verified opposition. When we speak of verified opposition, yan yung may identifying the complainant, the affiant. No, it's duly verified. No? So for that, of course, we refer it to the JIB if the applicant is a judge.
Is he or she automatically disqualified?
No.
Not necessarily.
Especially, we have, but of course, the JBC does not have the quasi-judicial function to rule on that. That's why we have to refer it to the JIB. And we will await for the decision of the or resolution from the JIB. No? And in the meantime, we would look whether he later on could still or she can still be nominated. No? We also receive unverified opposition. So interestingly, there are a lot of unverified. So when we speak of unverified, it is anonymous. We do not know. No, are they? That we have to take it with caution because it's easy to destroy someone's personality,
exactly.
someone's character. So we have to look that with careful evaluation. So we will not just easily say, "Oh, this is true," and therefore you will now be disqualified. So on that, of course, we will look at several things. In fact, what I do whenever I would receive that, this personal thing I do, I would ask around. If I have a friend from Cebu, if I have a friend somewhere in the South, is this true? What is his reputation? Well, at least as far as I'm concerned, I know if the unverified opposition is true or not.
Sir, like a private investigator?
At present, well, the good Chief Justice has proposed that this can be done later on by the judiciary marshals.
Right. So right now it's just your own initiative.
Yes,
right?
yes.
But what happens if you hear something negative about the applicant? Can they still be called upon during public interviews? Can they still go through the public interviews?
I think the public interview is also a good avenue for them to thresh out these positions. At some time, of course, while maintaining the anonymity of the respondent to that survey, we would ask questions so that he could ventilate it. But interestingly, no one would admit it.
Yeah, of course.
That's why we still have to make further investigation. No? So, well, checking the integrity of these applicants is really hard. No? So it requires, in fact, no, that's how I advocate this public participation. That's why we open, no, we publish the names of this person. We would never know how these applicants behave until unless they would tell us. So I think that is our moral, social, and legal obligation. No, as members of the bar, we have to do that. And even if not, so long as you know that this person has done something, has been involved in a corruption, just let us know. No? And on top of that, we have, I don't know, Attorney Mike, if you have right now in your cell phone the IBP app, there is a portion or an icon about the JBC survey. So we also factor that. No? And to continue, there is another thing that we receive. These are technically feedbacks. No? So these are not oppositions, verified or unverified, but these are just feedbacks. These are just ordinary comments. No? There would say, no, this applicant should not be appointed because he lives, no, below this ethical and moral standards, etc. So again, you have to look at, no, the veracity of that and how you try to call. No? Well, is this known? And the good thing about doing this investigation, no, and trying to call your friends, no, in that area, there is no reason for these friends of yours to lie. So you would have, as a JBC member, you would now have the picture of the character of this applicant.
And they are supposedly impartial.
Yes. There is no reason, yes.
Applicant.
Unlike the respondent to the feedback.
Right. And do all applicants go through public interviews? Are there exceptions to this?
Not necessarily, no. So after this vetting of knowing the investigation, no, we would schedule them for interview. For trial courts, we would, because of the sheer number of applicants, we will have to divide it among us four. No? But sometimes the other ex-officio members would help us also. No? And as far as the appellate courts are concerned, the applicants to these appellate courts, we will have to conduct a public panel interview.
Only for the appellate courts.
Yes.
Right. And it's interesting because you've been with JBC since
2022.
2022. So you've probably conducted a lot of interviews with justices and some future justices of the Supreme Court, maybe a future Chief Justice of the Supreme Court. So what kind of questions do you usually ask?
Okay. I was actually thinking the first time I would venture myself into this public interview, I really don't know how to ask questions. That's why my opening statement, what question would you expect from the member of the academy? I really don't know what to ask. Whether I would ask questions. Remember, these are judges, no, and then justices. So I would ask them, no, and then of course I get some cues from the other members. But I try to blend something about personal, because an interview is not about knowing the intellectual competence. That's one thing the applicant should understand. Because as I mentioned earlier, we have to know the competence, integrity, probity, and independence. And you cannot measure one's competence through interview alone. So it's just one aspect. No? It might happen he or she was not able to answer the question. Why? Because he was not feeling well during that time. Or probably was not able to sleep because he or she has a problem the night before the interview. So it's understandable. But if you try to interview the applicant, what I'm looking at is at least their wit. They're smart. How they use logic. Because even if they do not read the law, they do not read the latest jurisprudence, they would be able to answer it by just using their logic. No? And laws are based on logic. No? So that's one thing I measure. Of course, I ask personal questions. No? For instance, the previous employment, you would see some applicants here job hopping. Meaning to say, stayed for about 2 months in one employer, then go to the next one, stay for about few months.
Is
then
that
go
a
to
red
the
flag for you?
No, that's a good thing about the interview. Because you get the chance to know why are you doing this. Maybe because of the personality, because some of them would answer, I am not, I think he's not fit for that job. He's looking for something else. And that's a good sign. No? And later on, you would see he would stay long in the company, probably because he or she was able to find the job that would fit his competencies.
As an interviewer, Attorney Ferme, which type of applicants would impress you? For example, what do you usually look for? And which ones would send a red flag to you? Maybe this applicant is not so qualified.
Yeah. I am always a believer of integrity. So among all those four qualifications as provided for in the Constitution, competence is something that is quantifiable. You see the bar examination, you see everything, the written exam, it's all graded, the PJP.
Or the grades even from those school.
Yes, the PJP. So it's something, the most challenging for me is looking at the integrity. No? And how do I measure that? Several things. No? We have, the JBC has made a rubrics, no? A guidepost on how to determine an applicant's integrity. No? So, for instance, no, are there cases that have been filed against you? No? And again, also, you look at the psychological profile of because we are given copies of the psychological assessment. We would look at that. No? Another one, no, probably during the behavior during the interview. So someone who would be too arrogant, of course, it's a red flag for me. No? Remember, judges are endowed with power. Just imagine giving this person the power.
But was there an interview where, on paper, this applicant looks good, reputation looks good, but during the interview,
not only that,
he or she fell short of your expectation?
Well, this good thing, no? I won't reveal the name.
Yes, please don't.
The papers are good. The interview is good. But the psychological test says red flag. So I called our psychologist. Why is this red flag? You know what? I saw the drawing. No, I was even taken aback by the drawing. So, in fact, the psychologist told us, no, if it will be considered as a clinical psychologist evaluation, they would consider that as what do you call that? No? Psychosis. So you just imagine, you're going to put that in the judiciary if triggered, no, during a trial. So imagine what would happen to our judiciary.
But all of this would play a role in terms of deliberating who should be included in the shortlist.
Actually, that's interesting. No? Remember, I told you, Attorney Mike, that members would interview. In our interview, you may get some tip if you want to to apply later on. When we interview applicants, we have to make evaluations. No, that's actually one of my advantages because I'm a law professor, so I really have to evaluate students. So all our applicants, we evaluate them. No, we look at the competence, the integrity, the independence, and
this will come out in your questions.
Yes, right? No, and looking at the papers also, among others. When we evaluate them, we would categorize them. No? Sobrang galing, galing, at hindi pwede. So we have that code. No? So we create a pool. So we create a pool. Those who are sobrang galing, we put that in one pool. We set aside magaling. We can only consider them, no, later on. Yung hindi magaling, talagang excluded na yan. Okay. This pool, we can choose anyone from this pool. So that's how we do the creation of pool is we call that the second deliberations of the JBC.
Mm.
So we create this pool that then try to put, this one is good. It's very good. You can be a good dispenser of justice. No.
There's no limit to how many people are
Yeah.
that.
Since, for instance, I have interviewed around 150 applicants for the trial courts. Based on my evaluation, probably 120 would be super galing.
Oh.
Let's say 20 would be magaling. 10 would be hindi magaling. Yeah. So this 120, let's say the other members would have the same 120. So let's 4, that will be 480. So we will choose, no? If there are, let's say 100 stations, that's the most difficult part. If there are 100 stations, we have to choose who among these 480 applicants should be nominated in those 100 stations.
Right.
So that is actually the selection process. No? We now select who should be nominated.
But for example, for the lower courts, if there are 100 vacancies, how many do you nominate to the president?
Usually for trial courts, we only have 7. We have individual votes.
7 individual
Yeah.
votes.
Votes coming from the Chief Justice. 1 vote comes from the Department of Justice Secretary.
So the members.
The members, yeah.
Right. So you have 1 vote each for a
For
particular
one station. Yeah.
Right. So the names that would be recommended to the president presumably would also correspond more or less to the number of stations for the lower courts. It's a little more usually because you have different votes.
Yeah.
Right. But for the Supreme Court, how many can you include in the shortlist, and how is that determined? How many candidates can you vote for?
Okay. Actually, for appellate courts, we determine that on the day of deliberation itself. So that's why we have to prepare our list. For instance, on the day of deliberation, we will all agree out of, for instance, for the appellate court, I think there are around 130 applicants, no? I think more, no? So we would have, I personally would rank them 1 to 130. If on the day of deliberation, we all agree that, okay, who would be your top 30? I'll be able to give mine. So we cannot predetermine right now how many.
It really depends.
Yeah.
But it was specifically for the Associate Justice post, because there's just 1 post for the Supreme Court. Sometimes we often see maybe 3, 4 who make it to the shortlist. Sometimes there are 10. So how do you determine that? How do you go about it? You vote for one person and then you determine how many gets these votes?
We really decide on that day.
On that day.
No?
Right.
So that's why we have to be ready with our list. No? We have to know why are you voting this? Why are you not voting this? We in fact deliberate that.
So how long do these deliberations take?
So few hours.
A few hours.
In fact, no, if you notice, no, with respect to trial courts, Attorney Mike, diba? We mentioned we nominate one, and this one would consist the 7 names in the short list,
Right.
insofar as one station. That is, of course, on the assumption that there will be no opposition on any one of us. So technically, when I nominate, or other members would nominate, and there's no opposition, that nomination is as if nominated by all. So it can happen that, why are you nominating this? I have personal knowledge on this one. No? That is not fit. So I can change that, my vote.
And what are the usual common issues or challenges when you do these deliberations, coming up with a short list?
Well, the sheer number of applicants. It's really hard, no, to evaluate them. We have several matrix, like the most senior, but at times we do not consider that. Why? Because the less junior has some compensating factors. No, so it's so hard to determine which is the best among the brightest. No, it's really a challenge for me, and I think most of the members in the JBC.
And well, many people, of course, are expecting that you come out with a shortlist? Is there a time period for this
Yeah.
after the
In fact,
interviews?
with the advent of this digitalization, computerization, on the same day,
Mm.
we would be able to come up with a shortlist. But it will be uh, corrected, no? Because sometimes there will be typographical errors,
Right.
no? And like the names are misspelled,
Mm.
no? So we have to double check that. And but on the same day, no, it would be ready.
So, for example, you just finished the interviews
Mhm.
with 16 applicants for the Associate Justice post in Supreme Court. When can we expect, for example,
Yeah.
the shortlist? Is there a time frame, or maybe our next meeting
Yeah,
with the JBC?
we scheduled that, no. After this interview, we'll schedule our second deliberation. In other words, putting them in the pool.
Yes.
Okay, and I think this second deliberation is scheduled this Friday,
Mm.
and the selection, I'm recalling, no. I think the selection for the Associate Justice of the Supreme Court will be done next week because Justice Mario Lopez will be retiring by June 4.
Yes.
So before he retires, no, there is already a name submitted to the Malacanang.
All right. So the shortlist.
Yeah.
I recall in previous years, usually the Supreme Court en banc would also have their own, perhaps, nominee or their choice. What role does that choice play in the JBC?
Actually, I have not personal knowledge on that because that choice on the part of the members of the Supreme Court would only be given to the
Chief
Chief
Justice.
Justice.
So presumably, the Chief Justice is voting not just for his choice,
Yes,
but for the
yes.
choice of the entire
Yeah.
Supreme Court.
Well,
Wow.
actually, no, this will be my first time to participate in the selection of Associate Justice of the
Mhm, mhm,
Supreme Court. No, but based on what I have learned and heard, no,
mhm,
it is the Supreme Court is bound by
mhm.
the votes of his colleagues
Right.
in the
right.
High Tribunal.
And interesting because you did mention a while ago about JBC Oras, which
Yeah.
is a new way of, it's been there for a while, but you've firmed up Oras now
Yeah.
so that it's totally digital when you
Mhm.
apply for the Supreme Court. Can you briefly talk about it?
Yeah. Well, actually, Oras is in response to the Supreme Court's SPJI. We want to innovate things. No? Prior to that, to this Oras, applicants would be submitting voluminous documents to us. No?
Mm.
And then, I think that we were even asking them to submit 3 copies. Imagine if one copy would be about 2 inches thick. So if there are so many copies, no, and that only pertains to one applicant. So if there are 1,000 or 100 applicants, just imagine the number of papers, no. So this Oras was formulated, no, to make the life of the applicants easier. No? As I mentioned earlier, no, once you are given an access to this Oras, you have this number of yours that you will have, no, during your entire life, during your lifetime. No? So just keep on uploading your documents, updating your PDS, and it's all there. So you do not have to submit hard copies anymore. You do not have to resubmit or take your birth certificate again, no, because it's already there. No? And the good thing about this Oras, Attorney Mike, no, we can now have, we already made some, we can get some data there because we try to create our own profile for purposes of knowing the applicants. For instance, the number of years they have rendered in the judiciary. So we can extract that from there. No? So we do not have to look at, sift through the papers,
Right,
look there.
right.
So it's already there. So if it says, I have rendered 17 years in the RTC, so it's
can
there.
check.
We can already check. And and on top of that, no, there are many things like the access on part of the applicants. No, you remember when there is no, during those time, no, prior to this Oras, when there is no application for judiciary, there is no, let's say, there is no reason for you to check on your profile, on your papers. But now you can access it anytime. Even
right.
if you are not applying. Probably, let's say, no,
You want to update it.
yeah, you got or obtain a certificate of attendance in one seminar or
You
one
can upload
conference.
it.
Yeah, you can upload it
So it's
there.
like an online repository of your resume.
Yes.
So
True.
that anytime you wish to apply, you're ready to
Yeah.
apply.
That's a good thing about Oras because it's also interactive and it is easier on the part of the applicants. But of course, I understand that there would be some learning curve on the part of the applicants. But there is a feedback there, no mechanism we put in place so that if there are questions, no, we can address them. Again, we are not robots here
Right.
in the JBC. We try to humanize. We try to address their questions.
Right,
also.
right. And for the benefit of our listeners, the Supreme Court Public Information Office is coming out with an instructional video on
Yeah,
how you can
wow.
access JBC Oras.
Thank you for that. It's a great help.
So maybe that can guide them
Yes,
perhaps
yes.
in how to use JBC Oras. 'Cause coming out soon, so watch out for it. Hopefully this will help them to at least apply faster, easier,
Yeah,
and
yeah,
maybe
true.
keep an online repository of their resume.
Mhm.
So watch out for that. But just maybe to close our discussion, Attorney Firme, what's the importance of the public being aware of judicial appointments?
Mhm.
Because in other government agencies, you would just hear the president appointing somebody, or maybe you can just hear the boss of a certain agency appointing someone without going through the whole process. But here at the JBC, you have this whole process: application to interviews to shortlist
Yeah.
until finally the president appoints. What's the importance that the public gets involved in the whole selection process?
Actually, Attorney Mike, I'm into good governance.
Mhm.
If you understand the concept of good governance is very inspiring. Why? Because there are several principles there, no? Public participation, accountability, transparency, and I would focus on them, no, to answer the question. As I mentioned earlier, Attorney Mike, I would encourage persons to tell us the character, the behavior, the attitude of this applicant, whether that is bad or not, because we would not be able to know it without them. And if the public would know who would be appointed, it would only validate their public participation.
Mhm.
And that is transparency. So, am I heard? My comments that he or she should be appointed, was that heard by the JBC?
Mhm.
So that's transparency. And knowing the public knowing who was appointed, it calls for accountability on the part of the appointee. Would he be accountable for the mandate given to him? So, this public knowing who is appointed is actually, it accentuates the good governance that we are looking for.
Mhm. And how does that make you feel personally, Attorney Firme, that you are one of those privileged to ask questions to justices, future maybe Chief Justice even of the Supreme Court of the Philippines, that you are in that position asking the questions?
Yeah. It's very interesting. You know why? Because we look at judiciary as a dispenser of justice. Now, that's how we view judiciary. But look at it in its a wider perspective. Do we contribute to the growth, national growth, to the economic growth? I think yes. Because one of the barometers of our rule of law index would be the existence of a good judiciary. No? So here in the JBC, if we would appoint or select corrupt judges, justices, or those whose competence is below the expectation of many, what would happen to this rule of law index that we are achieving? That we want to attain. We want to increase our rule of law index for what? Because it's for economic growth. We want our investors to come here, the foreign investors, to believe that we have an existing judicial system. And it's only then that we have shown that we have a working judiciary, that they would invest here. And you know that what investments can do.
Right.
It can alleviate poverty. It can provide employment. And this rule of law that the judiciary can holds right now, it makes a great difference. And that is something I am proud of. no, in nation building. No, here in the JBC, we can look at it as you're just screening applicants. No, unknown to them, we are part of nation building. We are part of making good judges, justices, as you mentioned, in fact, future Chief Justice. And these persons would be able to carry out, or should be able to carry out, no, the good governance, should be able to increase our standing or elevate our standing in this rule of law index. So I am proud that the person I am nominating has the competence, has the integrity, the probity, and independence. Because only then we will be able to achieve a good rule of law.
Very well said, Attorney Ferme. You have survived the interview. No, but thanks a lot, because this at least explains to the public who might be confused. What is this JBC? Why is there an interview for those seeking to apply to the judiciary? So very thankful for joining us today, and hopefully many will learn from this interview.
Yeah.
So thank you, and we hope to have you again
Yeah.
on the podcast.
Sure, anytime, Attorney Mike. Thank you.
All right.
Thank you.
Thank you, Attorney Ferme. If you wish to know more about the Judicial and Bar Council, you may visit the JBC website at jbc.judiciary.gov.ph. Here's Tiff Atendido Beltran, Supreme Court Information Officer, for this week's Roundup.
From the Supreme Court of the Philippines, here's the latest. The Supreme Court en banc on May 20, 2025, ordered the partial lifting of the temporary restraining order it issued in August 2022 as against the No Contact Apprehension Program, or NCAP, of the Metropolitan Manila Development Authority, or MMDA. Kilusan sa pagbabago ng industriya ng transportasyon, and other petitioners are seeking to declare unconstitutional the ordinances in Metro Manila implementing the NCAP. The SC issued a temporary restraining order halting the implementation of the decision of the COMELEC canceling Darwin Sia's certificate of candidacy for Councilor of Manila's 2nd District. Sia was disqualified due to a 2014 conviction for electricity pilferage. The court directed respondents COMELEC and Larry de la Cruz to file their comments on Sia's petition within 5 days. The Supreme Court has ruled that letting customers listen to a short 20-second sample of a ringtone before buying it does not violate copyright laws. The court en banc, through Associate Justice Mario Lopez, upheld the dismissal of the complaint of the Filipino Society of Composers and Publishers, or PhilSCAP, against Wolfpack Communications, Inc. for copyright infringement and damages. The SC found that while Wolfpack's agreements with the composers did not specifically cover the use of song samples for previews, there was no copyright infringement because the previews qualified as fair use. The SC has stressed that children remain legitimate despite the nullification of their parents' marriage due to psychological incapacity. In a decision written by Associate Justice Josep Lopez, the SC 2nd Division modified the ruling of a regional trial court that declared a child illegitimate following the nullity of her parents' marriage. The SC affirmed that the marriage was void, but ruled that the child remains legitimate. The SC emphasized that once a child is legitimated under the family code, there is no legal basis for changing their status back to illegitimate. Allowing this would go against the law's intent to protect the child's best interest. The Judicial and Bar Council on Wednesday completed the interviews for the position of SC Associate Justice to replace the Honorable Mario Lopez, who will mandatorily retire on June 4, 2025. The JBC panel was composed of former SC Associate Justice Jose Mendoza, Professor Nisauro Ferme, and former Court of Tax Appeals Associate Justice Erlinda Uy. Court of Tax Appeals Associate Justice Maria Rowena San Pedro, Court of Appeals Associate Justice Walter Ong, Court Administrator Raul Villanueva, and Philippine Permanent Representative to World Trade Organization Manuel Antonio Tihangi consisted the last batch of candidates interviewed. Reaffirming its commitment to promoting mental health awareness in the judiciary, the SC launched the 2nd Regional Mental Health Unit on May 22 and held the 5th Regional Mental Health Summit for Judicial Region 11 on May 23 in Davao City. Chief Justice Alexander Hesmundo served as keynote speaker, while Associate Justice Mario Lopez, Vice Chairperson and Working Chairperson of the SC Governing Council for Mental Health, delivered an inspirational message during the summit. The Chief Justice served as the guest speaker at the first Luzon Regional Convention of the Court Stenographers Association of the Philippines, or COSTRAPHIL, which was themed Empowering Court Stenography for Judicial Innovation, held in Tagaytay City on May 22. On May 20, the Supreme Court led a session on the government's coordinated response to online sexual abuse and exploitation of children, or OSAEC, at the 2025 Open Government Week held in Quezon City. Court of Appeals Associate Justice Ronaldo Roberto Martin, Vice Chairperson of the JSCC Technical Working Group on Processes and Capacity Building, discussed the Justice Sector Coordinating Council, or JSCC's Tri-City Justice Zones on Anti-OSAEC in Cagayan de Oro, Iligan, and Ozamis, which were launched in September 2024. Other speakers were Iligan City Justice Zone Convener Judge Alberto Quinto, who discussed judicial handling of OSAEC cases and the experiences at the local government level, and ASEAN-Australia Counter-Trafficking Justice Systems Director, Attorney Darlene Pajarito, who spoke on a victim-sensitive approach to addressing OSAEC. SC Chief Communications Officer Attorney Michael Jobert Navalio moderated an open town hall dialogue. The Office of the 2025 Sharia Bar Chairperson, or SSBE, Associate Justice Antonio Tico Jr., has issued final reminders to the 2025 SSBE examinees and Sharia Special Bar Bulletin No. 5 as amended on the Policy on Academic Honesty, Guidelines, Undertakings, and Rules of Conduct. The 2025 SSBE will be held on May 25 and 28, 2025 at the University of the Philippines, Diliman, Mindanao State University Iligan Institute of Technology, Ateneo de Davao University, and Ateneo de Zamboanga University. You are now up to date with the Philippines Supreme Court. I am Tifat Indy Beltran, Supreme Court Information Officer.
And that's our podcast this week. Join us again next time for a detailed discussion of select cases decided by the Supreme Court. I'm Attorney Mike Navalio, your Supreme Court Chief Communications Officer. You can catch this podcast on the Supreme Court Public Information Office's accounts on X, Facebook, Instagram, Threads, YouTube, and Spotify. You can also catch previous editions on our website and on Spotify. This podcast episode was produced by the Supreme Court Public Information Office with Attorney Karen Martinez, Jay Rimpilio, and May Sibal as researchers, Brian Austria, Don Ryan Balza, Lawrence Olanyo, Austin Aliscad as video and audio editors, and Tyke Flores and Jerome Batumalake as web editors.